Churches don't need programs so much as they need cultures of discipling, cultures where each member prioritizes the spiritual health of others. Mark Deaver, theologian and pastor. All right. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. Do me a favor, folks. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to like and subscribe to my channel on both YouTube and Rumble. And for the really serious folks out there, hit that bell so you never miss an episode. All right, today I'm starting my series on called Liberty Dad Memoirs. Don't worry, I'm not dying or anything. Not that I know of. It's been something that's been on my mind. And I was just thinking, like, man, I got all these stories to tell. And, I was thinking about how they influence, you know, 20 years ago, the stories that I have to tell influence the attitudes and behaviors that I have today and my ideas. And I thought, it would be great to kind of tell some of those stories. And the idea being behind it being that we just kind of break away a bit from news and politics. Now, I wanted to start this actually Wednesday, and I wanted to start doing this on Wednesday. However, last week, as we all know, there was a huge storm, and then my son got sick over the weekend, and then this week, just a bunch of different things were happening. He's still sick now. He's actually out of school right now, with doctor's note, so we're good. And what I wanted to do is actually started on Wednesday, but then just because of all these things, my schedule's kind of all messed up, and I've got like an appointment tomorrow morning, so I won't be live tomorrow, but I do have a dad talk that is going to drop tomorrow morning. So I'm kind of just rearranging the schedule this week a little bit to make sure that I can bring you a show every single day, because that's the goal here. A while back, I was a little inconsistent, and I kept saying, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to get this right. And that's what I'm doing. So this week, I'm just kind of moving things around so that we can continue with the show. And then hopefully next week, I can kind of get on the schedule, the order in which I want things. So expect that. So on Wednesdays, Liberty Dad Memoirs, that's where I'm focusing mostly on stories from my life. They won't necessarily be in chronological order. I'll use these stories to discuss, how I became Liberty Dad today. And some of these stories, they might shock you. I've had a few wild runs, let's just say. Others might make you laugh, maybe even cry. And with any luck, none of them will bore you. So that's really the big goal there. So that's what I'll do, and then I will try as I can to intertwine them a little bit with current events. But the focus is not going to typically my when I do the show, I focus on current events, things that are happening. And so now on this series, what I want to do is focus on the stories and kind of like, okay, here's what happened, here are these stories, and here is how they brought me to where I am today. But instead, on this show, on this series, if you will, rather than focus on the events that are current, just kind of add them in and say, okay, do you see why I look at this particular event the way that I do? And my goal kind of is to create more community. And I know that, some of you I know personally, some of you I've never met, and I may not even know your real name, maybe not even see a real picture of you. So I know you from a distance, but I want to create more of a community with this show. And in order to do that, I think it's going to take opening up just a little bit more. And so I'm willing to do that. And I think it'll be fun. So that's what we're going to do. All right. So this episode, we're going to start back around 2000. Okay. And I was probably about oh, I not wasn't probably. I was about 22 years old, and I think it was around the year 2000 when when this story begins. I had been attending church services since I was about 15. So when I was 15, I was in ninth grade and I was going to a public school in Dayton, Ohio. The public school was Meadowdale High School. It was, it was a city, it was a public city school, and I had to go through metal detectors to to get into the building, right? And I remember meeting a girl, and she was a Christian, and she was like, "Hey, you should come to church." And I was like, "You're pretty. Of course, I'll come to church." So I did, and that kind of kicked off going to church with the whole family. Like, the whole family kind of got into it, and I think it had been something that my mom and dad had been it had been on their minds, sort of. I don't know how specific, but, I don't think it was out of the ordinary for them for their son to all of a sudden be like, "Yeah, I wanna go to church," and then they go, "Wow, that's a really good idea. We should do that too." I think it was kind of like all these things kinda work together. And so we started attending church, and it took us a number of years to kind of find our way. And, we went to different churches, and I had so many different experiences, most of them with smaller churches. And let me tell you something, if I'm kind of backing up a little bit from the year 2000, but if you had been to church services in small churches in the 1990s, like, you would have some stories to tell. There was some interesting things that happened, right? And I don't mean necessarily bad things, but, I've been to the churches where, they're the holy rollers. If you're unfamiliar with the holy rollers, those are the people that, will in the middle of church service, all of a sudden people are running around screaming, right? And not in a bad way. They're just, they're like, "Hey, we're filled with the Spirit, and we're just moving," right? So, and I've seen some things is interesting. And so going back to 2000, we're kind of established now in attending church. And I, for whatever reason, had a passion for teens. I wanted to be a youth leader. And I also was a bit wild looking. So today, you see me and you see a ball cap. It says, and it's nothing, it's definitely old man ball cap. It's got a woodworking company on my ball cap. I wear a button down shirt and jeans most of the time. Sometimes you'll catch me in a t-shirt. Sometimes you can also catch me in a polo shirt, but I'm almost always in jeans and a button down shirt, with my ball cap, and then my nice little sports watch, my little monochrome sports watch that I really, really love. And so that's what I look like today. And I have a beard. Generally keep myself relatively clean shaven, trim the beard up and all that. But back then, I was your typical 20-year-old. And I just learned about, like, punk music and ska music, for anybody that's really in the know. And so I kind of donned this punk-ish look, and I live in the Midwest now. Okay, so I don't live in a major city like New York or San Francisco or somewhere where you would expect to see some of the, this wild stuff. I'm in the Midwest, and the look that I have is I have hair, and my hair was brown at the time, and a relatively dark brown, but I had bleached it, so it was bleach blonde, and it wasn't terribly long, about, medium length or something like that. And I would wear huge baggy pants, chains hanging off my pants. I loved t-shirts at the time. So I was a big fan of going to, like, Spencer's and getting all the wild t-shirts that say crazy things or have, goofy or kind of inappropriate pictures. So that's the kind of look that I had. And then I also had a septum spike. So I had this big gigantic spike in my nose. And we started attending this new church. And the first day that I was there, I walk in and I go up to the pastor and I'm talking to him, and he's like, "Yeah, he's asking me, like, what kind of things, am I interested in, just kind of getting to know me." I said, "Well, I really like youth and I would love to be a youth leader." in your church?" Like, I literally just walked in pretty much and was like, "Yo, you looking for" it's like I was looking for a job or something, right? Like, "Yo, you looking for a youth leader? Because 'Cause I'm your guy." And, again, this is the '90s, and my look is out of the ordinary, right? I was one of those kids that you might see at the skate park, and you're like, "I hope they're not trouble." And here I am in the church talking, I'd like to lead all your youth." And the pastor says, "Well," he said, "we have a youth leader. Let me introduce you, and we'll see where it goes from there." All right, cool. And it was about a few years later when that youth leader moved on that I replaced them and I became the youth leader. And it was an amazing several years of being a youth leader. And the kids that I worked with, so I worked with um, teenagers in high school, and my ex-wife at the time, who was my wife, she would work with the middle school kids. I was like, that's where she felt really comfortable, and I felt really comfortable with the ones in high school. And most of the kids that we worked with were from what you might say the wrong side of the tracks, or you might call them disadvantaged. But they were a lot of rough kids. And so this is this is how I became a youth leader, right? Like, I just walked up in a church, dressed all crazy like, and let me tell you, the church that I was attending, I was the only one there looking like that, except for, maybe some of the kids every now and then, right? Like, I'm the only adult in there who's walking in, with a studded wristband. I think sometimes I had a studded collar, um, a septum spike, you know, kind of punk rock looking. And I had wild ideas, not necessarily bad ones, but just wild ones for a conservative church in the Midwest in the '90s. So this was who I was. And let me just tell you a couple of to give you an idea of my ideas that I had. I decided that one of the things that the teens needed was a place to hang out on Friday and Saturday nights. And so I created this, like, I guess you could call it like a quasi nightclub. And I named it Another Day in Paradise. And I can't remember why, but it was Another Day in Paradise. And our little logo was pink flamingos. And what I did was, at the time, I was really, really into Christian music. So I got really into a lot of their rock. At the time, Christian music wasn't so good on rap music. There was like a few bands out there, a few artists out there that were decent, but for the most part, if you wanted to get Christian music in the '90s that was comparable to mainstream music, you were listening to like rock and maybe even some punk and even some ska music. And so, and just if for anybody that doesn't know, because I know when I say ska music, people are like, "What?" Like, if you know, you know, and if you, it's like you either know or you don't know. It's not like you can guess or have an idea. It feels to me. So, for anybody that's not familiar with it, ska music is basically take like a almost like a rock band, and then you add a bunch of brass instruments. And so you might have on stage somewhere between 5 and 7 people, and you've got, you might have trombones, trumpets, any number of brass instruments, and you could have other instruments too. Those were the most typical that you would see. And the music could be, it could just be wildly different. You could have one band that sounded really, really hard and tough, and another band that was like crazy lighthearted and fun. And most of the bands, they typically did fall into this like goofy kind of, like, there was a lot of fun songs and stuff like that. And it was somewhat in a way counterculture. And so that's ska music in a nutshell. And so that's the kind of thing that I was listening to at the time. And so I said, all right, let's start this like quasi nightclub. And one of the things that I did was I reached out to a local company and I said, "Hey, I would like to get a pool table and some arcade games, and I would like to rent them." That's what they did. They rented them out to like parties and stuff like that. And I said, "I would like to rent them. for this event. And they said, "Oh yeah, that'd be a great idea." They really liked what I was planning to do, and so I don't remember all the timelines, but I know that there was a Friday for which I was supposed to make the first payment, and I was going to make like regular. I think it was weekly payments that we had agreed upon, and I was going to make the first payment on a Friday, and I blew it, totally missed it, and so I just was stressing out the whole weekend because I was like, man, I just can't believe it. And they weren't open on the weekend. There's nothing I could do about it. Just wait till Monday. So on Monday morning, right away, called him up and I said, "Hey, I'd like to make this payment." And the guy said, "Well, we talked to our lawyers and they decided that this probably is not going to be a good idea. So good luck." And now I was embarrassed because I'm like, I'm trying to start this like little nightclub. And so I ended up finding another company and I was a little bit more diligent. And just to tell you, like this, that one event affected me greatly. It was so embarrassing to me that I was going to be the youth leader of this. I was the youth leader of this organization, this church, and I was trying to start this nightclub and, for kids to hang out and not get in trouble. And then I missed the first payment. And then now they didn't want to do business with me. So, this, and I'm 46 now. And so at 22, I learned a very, very tough lesson, about making payments on time. So it was an interesting life lesson that I had to learn. So anyway, we ended up getting everything that we needed. We got the pool table, we got the arcade games, and we would make some food. And we had these cases that I don't remember where we got them, but we had these cases, these like glass cases, and we would put food in them, and then the kids could come in and they could. We would go and we made it. We worked out a deal with a local store where we would buy in bulk, like chips and sodas and stuff like that. And then we would bring it in and we didn't charge the kids a whole lot. We weren't really trying to make money. We were just trying not to lose money. So whatever we charged, I don't remember if we charged them our cost or maybe just a hair more, but we kept it pretty low. And that was the purpose. And so what would happen is the kids would come in and we would sign them in so that we knew who was there and we would keep count. And we would get in this small town of Richmond, Indiana, with maybe 40,000 people in the municipal area, right? A community of about 40,000 people. I think it was like 60,000 if you went like on the skirts of town. I think something like that. But it was around 40,000 people. We would get 20 to 25 kids coming every Friday and Saturday night. This is a pretty good sized crowd, for a small church of 100. And what we would do is we would play music and they could play all the games. They could buy soda. And then we would have a game and then we would do the sermon, right? That's normally what you do. You have your sermon at the end. And the game is where it got interesting because I just came up with ideas. And some of the ideas, well, they were a little bit wild, like I said. So for instance, because I liked doing just fun games that were silly and goofy. So one time, for example, I went and I got a bunch of pantyhose and bananas. And so then it was a contest and we got volunteers and the kids would come up and I would give one half a banana and I'd give the other half a banana. And then I would tell them to chew up the banana but not swallow it. And then to take the pantyhose and put it over their head, and then try to spit out the banana through the pantyhose into a cup, and whoever finished spitting it out first would be the winner. Now you might say, "DL, that's just crazy. That's lunacy. Like, why would you do that in a church?" Because that's who I was at the time. I was just a crazy guy that I had ideas. And what I was trying to do was have fun. And I wanted the kids to come in and enjoy being there because I wasn't too far from being a kid myself. I was only 22. And I thought, well, if church is sometimes boring to me, what's it like to these 15, 16, 17-year olds? Especially since many of them were in trouble all the time. Not all of them, but some of them knew all the police officers on the force by name because they were in so much trouble. Again, like I said, they came from what you might say the wrong side of town, the wrong side of the tracks, and it was this large group of kids who kind of knew each other and interacted together, not necessarily all friends per se, but they were kind of they shared similar circles. And so that was one of the games that we would play. We play other games similar to that, and they enjoyed it. We all enjoyed it. It was fun. And sometimes my ideas did get shut down, right? Because maybe I did take them too far. And for instance, let me just tell you one of those stories. I I got cat litter, and you probably already like if you groaned when I just said that, you're right on target. I promise you. So I got this cat litter, and then I got Tootsie Rolls. And I basically put 2 bins out because these were always like competition style games, like, bring 2 up and see, who wins, and then, bring the next 2 up, and we didn't do it. It wasn't like, these 2 win, these 2 go, and then 1 wins, and then they stand by for the next one. We didn't quite do it like that. It wasn't like, it wasn't, like a basketball type, where you keep working your way up to see who the final winner was. We were just, basically kind of having fun with, and, there could be multiple winners. And so there were these 2 bins full of cat litter, and I put and I well, and I actually did this, but I'll tell you where the idea got shut down. So I put the Tootsie Rolls inside of the cat litter, and I was like, "All right, we're gonna blindfold them and then have them fish them out with their teeth." And that idea got squashed. Probably a good idea, honestly. It's probably good that it got squashed. But, like my wife at the time, and then even my good friend who was the music minister, who was like maybe a year older than me, maybe 2 years older than me. He was like, "Nah, dude, that's going too far. Like, yeah, that's a little crazy, man." And so I backed off. So we ended up just having a race to kind of like, I think we blindfolded them and had them grab them with their hands rather than their teeth. All right, but these are some of the ideas that I had, and trust me, there were plenty of other things that we did. And so this was part of the what I did. Now, I also had on Wednesday nights, we would have our youth meeting, and I would do your typical youth leader stuff. And then I would engage with the teens, throughout the week. Sometimes, they would stop by my house, or sometimes they would call me up and ask me to come over and help them with something. And so I would do that, and I would work with them. And there's plenty of stories, and eventually, as these memoirs go on, I'll tell some of these stories. I won't try to tell them all today because there's just way too many. But I want to give you a sense, of who I was and how I got started in this, right? Remember, I started by waltzing into a church, punk rock looking, a very conservative church. Everybody's conservative. I walk in and I'm like, "Hey, I want to be your youth leader." And they're like, and the pastor, he was very open. And I think about how open he was all the time and the impact that it had on me. Because had he not been very open, well, where would I have been? Right? Like I would have been, I might have just been a regular attendee. I might have decided not to go to church anymore. Might have said, really isn't for me. Right. And his openness allowed me to have these experiences. His openness allowed all these teens to have these experiences, very positive ones that hopefully today they look back on and laugh and say, man, those were some crazy times. Those were some good things. And so that's the story that I wanted to kind of lead in with and just kind of tell you and say, like, look, and these memoirs aren't going to be all related to church and religion. And today I'm no longer I mean, I attend church with my family. We attend Catholic mass. My wife is devout Catholic. I am not. Um, Depending on who you are, you might say that I've fallen away, I've backslidden, or I've just moved on, depending on how you want to describe it. But I consider myself today no longer religious. However, I do think about it from time to time. And I go, man, I wonder, I wonder if I should reconsider. And so, the thoughts are there. And the thoughts are there because I had these experiences. Because what happens when you get older? You think about your past. You think about your future. You think about these things. You don't really think about it too much when you're younger. When I was 20, I wasn't really thinking about, man, when I was 10 years old, like I just wasn't, that's not how it works. But it does work that way as you get older. And you go, man, and you think fondly if the stories are fondly, right? You think back about some of the stories that shaped your life. But I think more importantly, it's good to think about how do these stories shape who I am today and the ideas that I hold today. How did I go from there to here, or how did I just get here? And I think that's what I want to communicate to you as an audience. Some of these stories, again, there'll be many stories, and some of them will be even more wild than what I said today. And so in a moment here, we're going to go to intermission. And then when we come back, I want to talk about something that's a little bit more current. And then I want to talk about this idea, a sense of community and the future. So hold tight. Let's go to intermission. And then when we come back, we'll continue this conversation.
I'm out here on a very windy afternoon in front of the Arkansas Capitol building here in Little Rock. And if you're not from Little Rock and that building looks familiar to you, well, there's a reason. You see, when construction began on it in 1899, the idea was that it would be a replica of the U.S. Capitol building. And when construction completed in 1915, that's exactly what we got. It really is an absolutely gorgeous piece of construction. The exterior is Batesville limestone, quarried in northwest Arkansas. Inside, there's marble and granite from Alabama all the way to Colorado. There's even 24-karat gold-plated Tiffany chandeliers inside that building. Now, I wish I could tell you that the things that came out of this building were just as beautiful as its construction, but I can't. Namely because government's job isn't to create beauty or ugly or good or bad. Government's role in a free society is to secure the rights that you and I are born with. Now, governments and buildings and people in buildings like this, during times of crisis especially, do not have a great track record of securing those rights. In fact, during scary times, they've done horrible things, like throwing people into internment camps when they were of a different nationality, forbidding their speech, compelling their speech, taking their property, compelling their labor, conscripting them into military service, preventing them from peaceably gathering and assembling and worshiping how they wish to, disarming them, throwing them in cages, in boxcars, and sometimes killing them. Now, we know that times are uncertain, and we certainly have some uncertain times coming. I think we all agree that the economy is not as strong as the media would have us believe, that we have these rising tensions in the Middle East, Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, North Korea. We have a fragmented southern border, and it appears that the federal government has an out-of-control spending policy that threatens the very existence of the dollar itself. And of course, we always are under threat from the very next medical emergency. I don't know what the next thing is going to be that comes to Arkansas. I don't know what it's going to be, but I guarantee you this, no matter how scary it is, if I'm in that building, I'm fighting to defend your rights. I'm fighting to make sure you're not disarmed. I'm fighting to make sure you keep your free speech, that you own your property, that you own your labor, that you have the ability to peaceably gather and assemble and worship how you want to worship and live how you want to live, so long as you aren't hurting anybody. Now, look, I know times are tough. I know that other campaigns have your financial interest. I get it. But I'm going to remind you that you cannot buy your rights back. You can't buy them back. However, you can invest in defending them today. And any U.S. citizen can donate to our campaign. And you might be saying, well, Michael, I don't live in Arkansas. Why do I care about what happens if you get elected to the state house or not? Well, here's why. Because this is the most winnable race for liberty in the country, hands down. In the brush fire of freedom that starts the revolution across the country has to start somewhere. And there's no reason it can't be right here in Arkansas. The people of the 75th District, you have a big decision to make. You can vote for more of the same old, or you can vote for someone like me who is committed to defending your rights and relegating government to its proper role. The future of liberty depends largely on you. Visit mw4liberty.com/donate. Choose liberty, make history. My name is Michael White, and I approve this message.
All right, we're back. Okay, so let's tie this in together and let's make some sense of the small story that I just told you. I think it's good to create a sense of community among people. And the more sense of community that you build, the stronger your community is, and the more likely people are to stay in your community, and the more likely that they are to maybe return, the more appealing it looks to outsiders who may be interested or thinking about your community. So, let me show you something that I just saw recently. You know Russell Brand, and apparently he's become a Christian. I'm not terribly familiar with all the details. I don't follow Russell Brand quite closely, but I saw this post, which kind of made me think of my beginnings and started making me think about it. And I was like, this is, so I think there's a thought to be had here. So let me pull this up on the screen and then I'll read it to you for those who are just listening. So this is actually from somebody named Pastor Mathis. I don't know who Pastor Mathis is. Um, couldn't tell you anything about him. I don't know if he's a good pastor, if you will, or a bad one. Couldn't tell you if he's a more liberal pastor or a more conservative one. Judging from the tweet here, it seems like he may be a bit more conservative, but I can't really say. And he said he's responding to Russell Brand, who had posted a picture of him baptizing another person. So there's two men in this river. By the way, I was baptized in a river as well. So Russell Brand is and another man are baptizing a third man in the river. Russell Brand is in his underwear. I don't quite understand that part. This is the first time that I've ever seen anybody that down dressed in while they're being baptized. So, but hey, whatever. Like that's maybe that's the thing that they've got. Maybe they've got some interesting reasoning behind that. I couldn't say. And Russell Brand says it might seem a bit or a bit soon to be baptizing people, but the apostles did it on day one. So here we are. And then Pastor Mathis responds and says, again, stand down and be a quote pew sitter for a few years before trying to disciple other people. Be patient and put some clothes on. Now, what I'm not going to do is try to make an argument about theology. That's something for, theologians and Christians who are interested, in those arguments to make. But I think we can look and we can have a conversation about community, about these kind of experiences in general. And I think it's applicable to pretty much any community. So, like I said, I'm no longer a practicing Christian today. But if I were to ever go back, it will be because of the experiences that I had that I can look back fondly upon. Now, if I had had very negative experiences, that would have shaped my attitude today. And I might not be as willing to reconsider, right? So, when we're talking about community, whatever community you are in, the thing that we want to think about is what experiences are we leaving people with? You might be familiar with, and I don't know her last name, but it's the redheaded girl who was an OnlyFans star, and then she just recently turned to Christianity, deleted her OnlyFans, deleted all of her adult material. She goes by the name Nala. I can't remember her last name. She came out and she said, "Hey, you know what? I'm going back to Christianity." And I watched part of an interview with her and one of the guys from Daily Wire. I can't remember who it was, but I watched part of the interview and turns out she's a pastor's daughter. So she had an experience. Now I can't speak to her experience. I don't remember. I'm sure she described her experience growing up, and I think it was a very strict one. But I assume that there were some positive experiences that she walked away with. And those positive experiences likely influenced her decision to return back. So whether you're Christian or in the case of libertarians who are my larger following, the question that we have to ask ourselves is how open are we? Because our openness drives our community and its growth. The more that we can involve others, the more we can create valuable experiences for other people. Those valuable experiences then in turn create community. They create a sense of belonging. They create uh, they create a vision or a view from others who are not within that community that might be appealing. And the best thing that we can hope for those who leave the community is that they take time in the future to think back upon those experiences. So, for example, everybody knows about the Amish, and you probably know that there is a certain age where young Amish, I think both men and boys and girls, they have something called, I think it's called Rumspringa, where they get to go out and experience the world. So in the Amish communities, they don't use electricity. They don't condone drug use. I don't know if they drink at all, but I know they don't condone drunkenness. I don't think they drink. But their young people are permitted to go out for a time and experience the world and all the pleasures. And then they can make a decision and say, do I want to come back to this community? And many do. And why do you suppose that is? Do you suppose it's because they go out and they enjoy all these fun things and they party and they live it up and they do drugs and they do all these different things? And then they go, man, that was so much better than the life I was living. Well, if it was, then the likelihood that they return is low. But since most of them do come back, then what we can assume reasonably without actually having experienced it ourselves is that they grew up in a community where people ensured that they had good experiences. They created a community that people wanted to be in. And so, even though they go out and experience something entirely different, the draw is, you know what? I'd rather be in my community. And I think that's the message that we can take away today is that whatever community you're in, and today, the community that I'm in at large is the libertarian community. So I would be speaking more to libertarians, but I'm drawing upon my Christian past to say, what kind of experiences are we giving other people? Are we telling them, hey, you can come in, but you need to be a pew sitter? That's you don't get to do anything that's quote unquote fun. Or are we telling them, like a pastor once told me, hey, why don't you come in and the role you're looking for is filled right now, but let's see where it goes. And who knows? And then in a couple of years, after having been involved in a community, one that was accepting, one that heard my ideas, one that even implemented some of those ideas before I got to be the quote unquote one in charge, then that community says, now it's your turn, right? And I think there's a difference. When you say be a pew sitter, it kind of says sit down, be quiet, you just learn. You don't get to be a part of the fun things that make the community what it is. Or we can say, hey, come on in and get involved. And there's a place for you. Whatever that place may be, we will find it. That's what happened to me. Right? When I went in, the initial thing that I wanted to do was not available. Not because they didn't want it to be available. It was filled. There was somebody in that role. But what they did was they said, "Oh, that's your passion. That's what you feel you're being called to do. Well, let's connect you with that person. Let's get you there on that path. And while you may not be able to get that role today, we'll get you on the path so that role is somewhere in the future. You can maybe see it. You can be involved. You can get a sense of what it's like. And so when it's your turn, you're ready." And I think that's what the libertarian community needs to do. And I think that's one of our Achilles heels. We don't do this. We don't bring people in and say, hey, what are you passionate about? What are you good at? Let's get you there. Oh, you want to be in this particular role? Maybe it's not the time yet. But rather than telling you to just sit down and be a pew sitter, let's get you involved to the point where it feels attainable. It feels like we want you to get there. That is what it means to create a community. And then when people leave the community, which they do sometimes, maybe sometimes they no longer believe the ideas. And that's okay. It's okay if they leave and they no longer believe the ideas. What shouldn't be okay is if they leave and say, I'm glad I left the community because the community was no good. Right now, there are a lot of libertarians that are not part of our community, at least the party wise. They're part of the broader community, the liberty community, if you will. But I don't think that what we're doing is a good job of bringing them in and saying, let's get you on the path to be where you think you want to be. And maybe that path will change. Maybe it was always a possibility that I would get in and start seeing what it took and the work that was involved to be a youth leader and decide, you know what? That's not really for me. This other thing actually is. But in order for even that to happen, I still am needed. It's still necessary to give me that opportunity, to give me a reason to pursue it in the first place. But even if it's not libertarianism, maybe it's some other community. Maybe it's a gardening community. Maybe it's a cooking community. The sooner that you can bring people in and incorporate them so that they're bringing and adding value, the better your community is. And I think that's what we want to focus on. And hopefully, as you go about your day today, you will think about what am I doing to create a sense of community for others? Because there's always something that you can do. You may not be the leader per se, but that doesn't mean that you can't create community. And I think that should be incumbent on all of us to create community wherever we are. Times are rough. There's all kind of terrible stories going on. We just had a hurricane, demolished physical communities, just annihilated them. And guess what? If those communities had smaller communities or themselves, the physical communities, the physical communities of the towns and the cities, if those communities we're tight knit and we're working with each other, then it's easier to pull through when you have these kind of disasters. It's easier for newcomers to want to say, that's what I want. And that's what we should be seeing. We should be seeing stories. And I am seeing some of those stories, by the way. I am seeing where people say, hey, let's get help to these hurricane ravaged areas. And people are standing up and saying, I'm going to be the point person for this particular group. And if you're, and whatever the group is, right? There's different groups. And that's a good thing. That's what we should want. That should be the American spirit that we all strive to have, regardless of whether you're Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, whatever. We should always be looking to ensure that as Americans, we're creating as much community as possible with each other. And we can have our debates, and we will. But at the end of the day, we should all know there is a community for us to be involved in. And if we can do that, then America can withstand anything. And we will continue to be a great country. So hopefully this message resonates with you. Think about it throughout the day. But for now, I want to say thanks for watching, and I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture and some of these new series that I have. Remember, I also have the Dad Talk series. If you're a dad and you've got something you want to talk about related to being a dad, hit me up, as they say on the internet. I'd like to talk to you. Do you got to be famous? No way. All you need to be is a dad. As I told one guy, he said, I don't know that I'm anybody important. I said, man, if you're a dad, you're important. And I want you on the show because I want to talk to you about what's important to you as a dad. So I have my Dad Talk series. I'm now starting my Liberty Dad Memoirs series. And then, of course, I'm going to continue doing the other things that I've been doing. Bill reviews, talking about news, talking about politics, talking about culture. We're going to be well-rounded on this show. And I hope to bring you the absolute most value of any show out there. That's my goal. Make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer, my Rumble channel. You can go to youtube.libertydad.com. You can go to rumble.libertydad.com. And remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.